Now that's significant. The Market Research Podcast.
Hi there, welcome to this episode of Now That's Significant, a market research podcast. This is your host, Michael Howard, the head of marketing at InfoTools. Today, we're going to cross over to the panel discussion that took place at last week's AGM for RANZ, the Research Association of New Zealand. The panel discussion was on unveiling the economic crystal ball, what it means for the industry and our clients, chaired or moderated by the Deputy Chair, Ian Mills. Our panelists included Rob Clark from SEEK, who commented on the impact of our labour market. Carin Hercock provided an industry view and insights from the Ipsos New Zealand Issues Monitor. Jason Shoebridge from NZIER provided an economic viewpoint, and Liza Van der Merwe from Deloitte Economic Advisory Group. We're very lucky to have all four on the panel to discuss New Zealand's economy and how it's faring, how it may shape up in the future, and what it means for our industry and our clients. We hope you enjoy this discussion and look forward to seeing you on the next episode.
I do have some questions for our panelists, but I'm really going to encourage everybody to ask the questions that you always wanted to ask whenever you see any economic or large macroeconomic indicators on TV, and we're a little bit afraid to ask what they might mean. One of the things I'm really pleased about tonight is that we were able to welcome back some older members of the industry. Well, sorry. Actually, some old members of the industry. I know. But also to see that there is actually life outside research. Jason Shoebridge, now head of NZIER, Rob Clark, head of SEEK in New Zealand, joined by Liza Van der Merwe from Deloitte, who's partner for economics.
Yes, so our brand name is Deloitte Access Economics.
Thank you. And of course, Carin Hercock from Ipsos, who needs not very much introduction to us. Thank you. What we want to do tonight is put some questions to this group, who really, when you look at the brain power on here, really belies the size of this organisation. If you think about people we've got in front of us now, we shouldn't really be able to get access to some of these people as a small industry association like we are. So I'd really encourage you to ask questions. I have a few, but please feel free to jump in as we go through and kick off with a bit of a state, because it does feel a little bit different. I was looking at some numbers. I've been around a little bit, and I can remember back to sort of 2009 and the global financial crisis and the world was formed. 1999 and the dot-com bubble was going to send us all into the Y2K fits, and even when I left university and we had 20% graduate unemployment, something just felt different. It feels different this time around, and I don't know whether it's just me being old or whether it's a genuine thing. But for our panelists, I suppose, just to kick off with, from the numbers that you're seeing, you represent quite a broad range of statistics that we see, from what's in people's heads to actual numbers, with Jason and Rob and Lisa. Is it different this time around, or are we sort of imagining things?
I can maybe just kick it off. So I think in the first instance, just to compare historical data over a long time, I think it's very difficult to compare, because as we know, we've seen quite significant structural changes as well. And then one thing that we need to remind ourselves of is that the New Zealand economy is actually very resilient. So since 1991, we only had 3 relatively mild recessions. And a key driver of that is external shocks, so it was global shocks, either a supply shock or demand shock. During COVID, we had a combination of both a supply shock and demand shock. Whereas I think if we look forward, the key drivers is really going to be the location of the shock. Whereas if you look at the current geopolitical tensions, it's a lot closer to New Zealand and it's in Asia Pacific. So that could have quite a significant impact and will be different. Then if we look at population growth, yes, it's really positive now again, but the impact of that and the benefit of that is probably likely to be more limited, given our infrastructure challenges that we face, housing affordability, and mismatch between demand and supply. And then what is different currently is we really have a shock that's homegrown, so it's policy-induced shock, and that is what's really making it very, very different. And that is why we all might feel as if it's a recession as well. And again, as you know, if you look at GDP per capita figures, we know it's already at GFC levels. And we at Deloitte Access Economics, we're only expected to recover in 2025 next year.
Yeah, I think, so I agree with you, yeah, it does feel different this time. But interesting, we've got at NZIER, we run the quarterly survey of business opinion. That's been going since 1970. So we've got all that history. And actually, we looked today in preparation for this and plotted it against where the recessions have been over that time. And actually, when you look at it, pretty much when we're in a recession where we are now, business confidence is about where it is now as well. So it's not that there's a less confidence, if you like, or it's doom and gloom. What is interesting, I think, this time is, and which might be accounting for some of this, is two things. One is that we've gone quite quickly from a very high position as we came out of COVID, big spend up, big increase in demand. Everyone, was sitting at home, sitting on a whole load of cash, and needed to spend it because they couldn't travel overseas and things like that. And we've very quickly gone into this recession. So that sort of might be a little whiplash effect there as well. And the other thing, like Rob and I were in a presentation today for Treasury presentation, and they talked about the fact that we've had record net migration, about 140,000 people, which is a record year. So when you factor that in, and you factor in high inflation, which we have had since the 70s, our real GDP per capita is actually quite low. So it's dropped, nearly 6%, something like that. So that's probably making it feel worse as well, as we genuinely are. As households quite big.
So do we need to get back into the office?
Do we need
to become more productive?
Well, we need to be more productive forever. Productivity is awful.
Yeah. Rob, have you seen much of a change in those, the stats from coming through CIP?
Yeah, we are. So we're a reasonably good measure of the labour markets. One of the things about New Zealand is we can do any growth rate, you can chuck labour in. It seems to be the way to go because we're not that productive. And so we are seeing numbers that we haven't seen since probably 2016. So well before COVID struck, we saw record numbers during COVID and market. So as Jason said, we've had this fantastic boom, and I guess the degree of change we've never seen. Most of the time we're going along with the crash, so we haven't sort of done this. So I think that's a massive shock. Interestingly, this morning we also heard that consumer confidence was actually a lot lower than business confidence. It's hitting consumers more, and that's then driving businesses.
I think also there's a sort of social dimension to it all in terms of our resilience, because we've come out of COVID, and certainly in the data that we've seen, that there's been a real impact on people's mental health. There's been an impact on what they've got to spend on, inflation being such a big issue for households. But also I think before we had COVID and this round of inflation, housing was a really big issue. And I think with mortgage rates high, it's really hard for people to deal with inflation. So it's making it hurt more because they're paying more on their mortgage. So, there's a real, we've seen in markets around the world that inflation has been a big issue, but in other markets it's actually dropped down a bit, but in New Zealand it's stayed high. And I'm not an economist, but my theory is that it's to do with that housing impact as well, because it's making it harder for people day to day. So even though they can see inflation is coming down, they don't actually see any change in their personal circumstances.
Well,
Yeah.
they're probably, sorry.
So I think also maybe just adding to that is that one thing that's also different, say, to Australia is the transmission lag for monetary policy. Because I mean, most home loans in New Zealand is either on a 1-year contract or 2-year contract, whereas in Australia, 80%, 70% is basically floating rate. So any change in OCR, you will see that immediate impact on consumers, whereas in New Zealand, any change in OCR will really take some time, 12 to 18 months to have an impact in New Zealand. And it's, as you say, it's the first time quite a lot of households really live and breathe an environment of both high inflation and high interest rates.
And falling house prices as well.
And
So house prices probably 20% off their high.
house prices.
One of the
Could
interesting.
the panellists talk more about that Australia-New Zealand difference? Because it does feel like the grass feels really greener over there. That's the sentiment. Is that a real difference, or is that just?
I think it is a real difference now, but I mean, if you think back, the Reserve Bank in New Zealand was the first bank to raise interest rates globally, whereas Australia was really, I mean, I think they would get to the point where New Zealand's now.
But even in terms of like how much your basket costs at the supermarket, everything like that, like every expense over there seems less than their income is higher than. But that seems to be the narrative. Is that just a woe is me?
A lot of New Zealanders thought Brand New Zealand took a massive hit throughout COVID, and to an extent they're right, but in relative terms around the globe, we're still incredibly attractive. As the net migration numbers will tell you, we're still an incredible destination for those who are in much worse places. Interesting, the story, interesting, this morning we learned that, related anyway, that New Zealand was the second most generous in terms of per capita payment out of COVID, behind the US. And the rally is, more money chucked in, less goods to buy, higher inflation. So you have to pay. You have to pay the piper, and we're paying it.
Well, and there'd also be a lag in some of those big ticket items spending. If everyone's gone out and bought their new flat screen TVs, you're not suddenly going to be buying again for the next 3, 4, 5 years.
Cars.
Jolly.
Sorry, can I just kind of, the previous question, I just want to take it on a slightly different tangent, because you were referring earlier on to most mortgages in Australia being on variable rates compared with here in New Zealand where they're mostly on fixed rates, and I'm fairly sure it's the same in the UK as Australia. And the reason why is because in those countries variable rates are offered at a lower rate than fixed rates. Why is it that it's the other way around here? I've always wondered about it. Does anyone on the panel know?
In terms of the percentage?
Yes, I mean, people fix in New Zealand because they are always pretty much 100 basis points lower than the variable rate, whereas it is the inverse applies in Australia. Is that, am I right in thinking that?
Yeah, whether or not they're increasing more or less will be depending on which way interest rates are going to go at the moment. So now you can fix, I saw ASB can fix something less than 6% for 5 years. You wouldn't want to do that. But so it depends which way the interest rates are going. I suspect that the thing around fixing in New Zealand is probably more a risk aversion thing as opposed to trying to get a bargain.
So cultural, because they're the same banks as in Australia, really, aren't they? Fundamentally, they're offering a different. They're offering not just a different deal, but a different pattern of the deal. The interaction is different.
Yeah.
Just a question carrying on from what Rob was indicating was, I've spent 5-6 weeks out of the country, came back a couple of weeks ago, and out of the country, it's like, wow, New Zealand, I need to get there. It sounds like a great place. You come here, it's like, it's all dismal. And there's huge debates over orange cones and whatever. And do you think that we're particularly good at talking ourselves down? In terms of
Absolutely.
yeah, I mean, I think we're world class at it. And so how do we break, to use that phrase, the narrative of doom and gloom in terms of talking ourselves down?
That's a great question.
Well, having spent quite a few years in media, I can tell you one of the issues is that bad news sells. And that used to be, that it gets clicks. And so I think, we certainly see it, and when we track crime is a really good example.
Yes.
So, we do 2 crime surveys. One is the crime and victim survey, which is a massive survey, highly scientific population-based survey, and that will show you that, and it includes unreported crime, and it will show you that crime has actually been relatively stable over, the last 5 or so years. You would not believe that from the media. We also do another survey which is about the perceptions of crime.
Right.
And the perceptions of crime are much higher than the reality of crime. So, I think...
Well, okay, I've got an idea, right? So the Research Association with this august panel, plus great marketing insights, we should be the voice of positive reason, maybe.
Yeah, I mean,
the most reason.
But I come back here and like New Zealand Herald is online is about what's the latest drive-by shooting. TVNZ is like it's all miserable about the government stuff, doesn't know what it's doing. Maybe it's true, but it's a sense of doom and gloom. Whereas overseas, it's like, wow, I can't wait to get to New Zealand.
And also I think like one of the things that we try and do is bring the global context because a lot of the issues that we track are being tracked in every country around the world, and often they're the same. So, we think that we've got the worst inflation in the world, the worst crime rates in the world, but actually they're no different from everywhere else in some cases.
And our cost of living is the highest, and we have a diversity problem, and we have this problem and then that problem.
The other unique thing about New Zealand is we so tie our wealth to our property.
And the worry too, what you're saying, Duncan, is that then people come to New Zealand and then they go, they come to New Zealand and they go, why is everyone complaining?
Yes.
Exactly.
Well, Mount Eden's hell.
These are the what you see around Deloitte. Is that similar to what you see around the world, where actually our numbers aren't as bad as what we think they are when we're looking into them?
Well, I think currently, say, just in terms of economic growth, our economic growth is really, really slow. And in particular, so we talked about Australia, but we've also had quite a lot of clients in Australia, and they were really also all concerned and all really worried about the future, what will happen next year. But then, if you look at India, their growth is significant. If you look at their demographics as well, their average working age is 27. So I think in my view, that is also more perhaps the opportunity for New Zealand is rather to diversify ourselves a bit away from China, starting to focus on India, and also looking more at foreign direct investment and how to attract that. And then obviously China's economy has quite a lot of challenges. And then I think another opportunity as well for New Zealand, but that's also quite different, is Japan. So Japan avoided a recession, but quite interesting is that their interest rate is now negative for the first time in an extremely long time.
And they've got all sorts of other structural challenges with
And
population.
significant structural challenges. So I think it's not just the economic growth that we need to look at as well. I do think, for example, demographics can play a big role.
So, just on that question, correct me if I'm wrong, but in Australia they get their inflation figures monthly, is that?
That is the other thing.
Are our measures fit for purpose?
I think our measures is fit for purpose, but we can work on the availability of that frequency. So Australia is working on publishing CPI more frequently. I know Stats New Zealand is working on it. We do have a new GDP life tracker. I don't know if you've all seen it, which is really also indicative and more frequent in terms of the indicator of economic growth. But there's a huge opportunity to combine technology and AI and data to make it more frequent, to make it more usable, and also to bring in, which is quite a passion of mine, to really bring more dynamic, integrated economic modelling to inform decisions going forward.
Yeah, that's a very good example last week where CPI came out last week. The week before, the OCR rate decision had been made. So that OCR rate decision would have been made without seen that CPI data.
It's crazy.
And that CPI data.
Really?
Yeah, because
They have any, they must have.
well, they have lead
England.
indicators, for example, some of the things that but also that was 3 months worth of data, so it was a 3.3%. 3 months ago, the inflation at the end of that period would be considered yes, inflation that period. So yeah, it's more frequent. And particularly, as you say, things like Robstar are around Java. That's every day.
Yeah.
That.
Well, it's on the news every week.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah, so this is a question for the whole panel. I'm going to put it out there. I don't think financial literacy in this country or any country is particularly high. What would you, I think of the role of market researchers, where to be the voice of consumer. What is one thing you wish people knew about the information you provide that would make your jobs easier? If we could help inform and update them to help alleviate all these, because you're imparting really important things, but I feel like it's going over so many people's heads. So where's the gap?
I would probably just reiterate what Jason said, which is a much more coordinated, better use of existing, aligned sort of approach to make sure that all the data points, because very few decisions are made off a single data set. They're all trying to triangulate this and the other, and they do it probably to varying degrees of success. And I know Stats New Zealand, etc., they're always looking for new sources to try and cover as many bases as they can, treasure as well. So I think there's a lot to be done in that regard, because it's ridiculous to have a mismatch like that for such a I mean, how many lives are impacted by an inkling of where the OCR is going? It's huge.
You could almost feel it in the country when the CPI numbers came out. Everyone's going, you're kind of heading in the right direction.
Well, imagine when the OCR changes, that'll be going through.
I would say, speaking for the research industry, our job is to tell the human story behind those numbers and why behind those numbers and the impact on people's lives, because that is what our job is to kind of inform the policy around those things, because it comes down to the economy is just a place where people live. So
well, I think the other thing I'd say too is that actually where the research industry has a real role to play is in terms of the capturing the attitudinal data. So things such as inflationary expectations are a big driver of what inflation is going to be. If you think prices are going up, you're going to ask for a bigger salary increase. Costs go up, prices go up. Cycle likewise business confidence or consumer confidence. So I think that's a real place in the research industry.
I think it's important that you mentioned and it's about making the numbers real so that consumers can actually understand them. And I also like the idea of perceptions. I mean, testing consumer perceptions around aspects. I mean, even you've mentioned financial literacy, and we know open banking is coming, but I mean, what is the perceptions of consumers in New Zealand? Are they actually really, will we trust them?
do they understand it?
Do they understand it?
One area we, as an industry, we probably need to work a little bit better on is our relationship with the media as well. I think we can all think of examples where we've seen research results presented that might be overblown for the headline, or it might be a misrepresentation, and you know, you're on the back foot straight away as soon as that stuff has hit the headline, because they can go there and change it online. So more education and more working more closely with the media would be really key. Duncan.
Yeah, another problem is that when there's economic news, it can be taken as good news or bad news. For example, this week it was announced that New Zealand's imports had dropped considerably. In fact, we export more than we import. And for any government interested in balance of payments, it would surely be a good piece of news. And yet they're treating it as bad news because less imports means less retail activity. So when it's good, it's bad. When it's bad, it's kind of good. And that kind of confuses the economic picture.
Yeah, I mean, a classic example is we're in a recession now, which has been, to quote Adrian Moore, the Reserve Bank government has been engineered to get inflation out.
He hasn't done
So,
it great,
Yeah, that wasn't a great selling point. But ultimately, so you can look at the recessions, it's just necessarily pain we need to go through, and this is a good thing that we're now starting to get into the bottom of it, because then we can see the potential of the OCR is going to decrease before the end of the year. So you're right, I mean, it's
like housing affordability.
Yeah, housing
People have been crying for it. Now it's sort of happening.
Unless you
really like
us.
it.
We like to complain and we like to praise, right?
Yeah.
Unfortunately, that is just the way we are. It's more dramatic. It's it's more newsworthy. It's unfortunately a sad reality.
Speaking of the news and media, is there any media platform that we trust more than another one in terms of telling the news actually as it is, as opposed to a tilt in either direction?
Look, I think it actually sometimes comes down to individual journalists.
Yeah.
Like what we quite often do when we're making a release is think about who we want to offer it to, because there are some individuals that will take an issue that's quite sensitive, and like sometimes we're quite conscious about our research being misused because it could be on a sensitive issue, so we might go for a kind of more considered journalist who is less likely to do that, and who you can have a kind of conversation with about, this could be used in a negative way, let's work out how we present it, and they're open to that conversation. Whereas there might be other things that are a little bit more light-hearted or whatever, and it's about getting someone who's going to get that reach, or it could be an expert in a particular area. So I think, I think we're actually relatively lucky in New Zealand when it comes to our media. On the whole, they're pretty, if you deal with them, they're pretty good at trying to present the information well, and often it's actually the sub-editors who write the headlines. It's not the person who's on the digital desk who's just trying to get the clicks, and they're often the ones that actually pull something out that isn't even in the story. So yeah, it's hard to control, but you can kind of try and find the right environment for your different messages.
Supplementary question: do you believe that there is an opportunity for the likes of RANZ to provide a consistent, informed narrative about what New Zealanders are thinking about being in New Zealand?
Oh, I think definitely that could be something. And I mean, my challenge to RANZ is less about the research and more about the respondents. I'd love RANZ to be talking to people about participating in research, because we know our response rates are dropping, and a lot of that is because people are concerned about people knocking on their doors, or having the time to, but just kind of getting New Zealanders to understand that actually we're providing them with a voice, and it's really important that they participate. That I think would be a great chance.
But if people don't see the impact of that voice, what's in it for them?
Yeah.
Right?
Well,
if we're the voice of the consumer, and if we only talk to companies in back rooms, then that's great for someone who's happy to be paid $10 or whatever. But I mean, I did a research paper 10 years ago or something, and that's not what motivates everyone, right? Cash rewards and that type of thing, it's not worth your time, right? Like, knowing that there's a societal impact and stuff like that, we actually have to show that research makes a difference, and this is the collective result of that.
I think that's what I'm saying, really, is that what we do is really important.
We have to publish results.
We have to publish results, but we also have to just demonstrate how this data is used, it's used to inform the transport system, it's used to inform the public health system, it's used to develop products and services that are, that we use every day, and we don't
and we don't have to publish the insight, but we have to publish the impact.
I think one of the things I would like to see is more us being more involved in the idea of critical thinking.
Yeah.
If you look at the Norwegian, some of the Scandinavian countries now teaching critical thinking in schools as to when you're looking at a piece of research, is it a good piece of research? If I'm looking at a media source, is it a credible media source? And how do I know it's a credible media source? So those sorts of things, I think, are something that we need to do we can do more work with as
It's not the most in the time of AI.
Exactly.
I mean, people are using
I
that
mean,
to do their
we're
research.
getting thrown numbers at us all the time. How do you know what's a reliable set of numbers to look at?
The most visible sector of our industry is the polling that we talked about earlier. And, we have been doing quite a lot of work, as I described, to increase public's confidence in polling. But I think what's being discussed here is the sort of stuff that you're doing, Carin, on the positive news stories and getting that out there. That was some mechanism to make that happen, and then for us to be able to, as an association, to be able to
I think we're lucky with Ipsos
But even
that you're able to do international benchmarking.
Yeah.
Because we are like in a little goldfish bowl. Oh,
Yeah.
it's terrible.
Yeah.
But if we compare it across any range of countries, not just OECD.
But we're all assuming that the data points are good, right? Because
Brilliant.
we're good researchers, right? But there's a shit ton of bad data points and clickbait and all, like no one in this room.
Which are the ones the media goes for.
Right.
That's what gets
And why, to your point on critical thinking, we should be teaching of, if it's too good to be true, here's how you look at that. Here's if you see something that's like that, here's your thought process that you go through to analyse that, to know, is this a valid piece of data or not? And so that when you guys as valid sources come across and start talking about what's actually happening, regardless of whether they know what you're talking about or not, they lean in and listen harder as opposed to, oh, this is too hard for me to understand. I'm just going to look at the guy over here that says that the world's ending and that my basket compared to Australia is 3 times as expensive. Because that's what's happening right now, is what you're up against is someone on TikTok going, I went to the supermarket in Australia when I was on holiday and I paid this much. And it's bullshit.
So looking forward, because economists have covered themselves in glory in the last are there any sort of, if you were thinking the next sort of 3 to 6 months, are there any measures that you would be looking at if you were in the industry's position or you were running a business or you were running a mortgage? What numbers are you looking at to go, actually things are heading in the right direction or there's some risk associated?
The key measure is going to be the OCR, and that decreases. So if you look at, so we do quarterly predictions, and start of June we were thinking that the first rate cut was going to be probably May, possibly February. Actually now that's looking much more like November. The market is pricing in by the end of this year 75 basis point increase.
That's you talk about whiplash.
That's the big, probably 3 lots of 25. But I think actually what you'll get, it'll take a while.
Someone taking notes, sorry.
But as I said, it'll take a while to feed through the mortgage rates. There's a lot of mortgage rates and facts. But I think what you'll see is that actually that's the point at which New Zealanders will think, oh, there's light at the end of the tunnel.
Although
coming out of the...
What I'd really like to know is what proportion of people have gone to 6 months. Because I think a lot of people have gone.
Oh, they have.
They've come off.
It's
now gone actually 6.
Yeah. But I think that OCR rate is really important, and then that's going to come down if we see both inflation come down and expectations of inflation come down as well. That's
what are the numbers you guys look at?
OCR is also important and quite interesting. Our view was that the Reserve Bank will cut the rates, and we had that view since the start of the year. Other key factors that we look at is obviously inflation, combined with labour, demand and supply, and then also commodity prices is really a good indicator to look at. And we've also developed a new supply chain health index for New Zealand. And what we find is that that's actually quite a good indicator for economic growth, but also inflation. And as we know, there's quite a lot of challenges around sea freight, and that's really impacting logistics. So even based on that, yes, we are seeing inflation coming down, but that could actually lead to increasing trade war inflation again. And that could impact also the Reserve Bank's decision. But yeah, I mean, OCR, CPI, labour, commodity prices.
What about the New Zealand dollar, the value of the dollar?
I think, the combination of all those components will really impact our exchange rate as well.
So the dollar's a result, the dollar's a result, and the exchange rate's a result.
I would say from a consumer point of view, jobs and mortgages, and anything that affects those. Interestingly, we obviously our data is quite closely correlated to unemployment rates, with a higher unemployment rate, fewer jobs, and economic activity. The unemployment rate will look worst at the point where we've probably already turned for the better because it's such a lag measure. We're fortunate that our data is here and now, so it's a good indication of economic activity, and so.
I mean, we're still talking an unemployment rate of 5. It's
Probably topping out. It's only 5
you know,
days,
it's-
something like that. So it's not 4. Yeah, much worse.
Sorry.
Just when you finish.
Oh, no, I think those are the two key ones. And OCR is right here and now, and then obviously we'll be looking at our numbers to see whether there's any growth year on year. Not seeing it yet, and I think those are the things that will immediately affect. How's my job looking? How's my interest rate?
So a good majority of young workers in New Zealand locked out of the house ownership rate. They couldn't care less, I guess, what's happening with interest rates to an extent. So you're going to have two.
Unless it impacts their rent.
Yeah, exactly. So you've got two different streams of people. Like one, they see low interest rates at the moment, or low inflation, sorry. So they're quite happy. They don't have a mortgage to pay off. Yes, they've got rents which may be going up and down. They're hearing all of this talk about mortgages, which is just a non-issue for them at this stage. So do you have any generational...
I think, you can potentially classify it as a non-issue, but then if you look at that segment, and the unemployment rate in that segment is actually significantly high. So I do think that that's a challenge for New Zealand, and that is again also driving New Zealanders out of New Zealand because it's just so difficult.
It's wrapped as personal wealth.
Yes.
Yeah. Normally that's the group that are highest hit with inflation because it's the cost of groceries, the cost of petrol, all that kind of, so it's their living costs, but it's been unusual in New Zealand in that because of mortgage rates and housing, it's actually also impacted those who are in the more wealthier households or who have got mortgages. So it's kind of, and I think that's the reason partly that inflation has stuck around as such a high issue for people. And I've been watching, how, because we even asked a question about what are you going to be worried about in the next 5 years, and inflation was still the number one. People are actually thinking that this is going to have an impact on them for quite a while, and that sentiment can impact how people respond to the things like the cash rate coming down and mortgage rates coming down, because it's that confidence about when they start spending and if their job is going to be available. So, we'd be looking at how people are feeling socially.
And inflation is extreme, right?
Yeah.
Can I ask like a general question?
No, we can go to Jeff first.
Sorry.
Just before you. Rob, you made what was almost a throwaway comment a little while ago about how we're not that productive, and it seems to me that productivity could be a real key here. Can you just flesh that throwaway comment out a little bit?
Yeah, I'm probably not the greatest qualified person to comment, but what I do know is New Zealand has traditionally been low in terms of productivity relative to peer markets, which are both developed and relatively small. And it's some of the aspects of that are, as I said earlier, when we grow, we just tend to chuck labour at it. and that's not really great productivity. The additional piece of labour is probably reducing your productivity.
Probably importing that labour as well.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we've always talked about how do we add more value of the supply chain, and how tech companies are great examples of great returns as opposed to just a linear relation between revenue and
Does
labour.
anybody else have the keys to increasing productivity?
It's a multifaceted problem, and part of it is we don't invest in technology or our capital investment. Part of it is the nature of our economy. So think about actually a sector of the economy that has invested in technology and has seen productivity increase is actually agriculture, on-farm agriculture. So look at the yields that they now get, say, 30 years ago. There was this case, I don't know if anyone watches Country Calendar, but I do. And there's a point where I'll be on the picket line if they start taking away tickets. But there was this thing about 4 weeks ago, which just encapsulated New Zealand's productivity issue. So they showed this sheep farm, a dairy Angus beef farm, who was using quite complex genetics in order to be able to get better yield for this cattle. And then it went to the freezing rigs, and the inspector was basically holding up a set of coloured cards and comparing it to the meat to see what grade it was. So you've got this issue where that people have been doing that 50 years ago, exactly the same thing. So you just see these elements of the New Zealand economy which just don't move forward. And the other one, tourism, which is such a big part of it, it's actually quite hard, I think, to invest in technology to increase productivity there. And so as a result, you're just relying on throwing cheap labour.
I think, in New Zealand, I think we can really work on incentives as well to improve productivity. And as we all know, in the budget, Treasury indeed document that a chart indeed that almost illustrated and forecasting that we have a structural break and a structural issue related to productivity. But then if we look in the actual budget, all possible programs that could support productivity has even been cancelled or stopped, and there was no new initiatives introduced. So that is making it really difficult. And then even sectors that do have the ability to grow, contribute to innovation and productivity, they don't really, again, get any support or investments to grow and to grow our startup ecosystem in New Zealand as well, to grow that further. I mean, there's one example there which is quite a significant opportunity for New Zealand, is space and aerospace. And if you think about the application of Earth observation data and how that can improve productivity. But again, we need some funding and capital and support and investments to make that.
I think an interesting sector too is gaming. Where I think the government's now started to subsidise just because the threat of losing that talent to other markets is so high that they're having to, and that sort of encapsulates part of our problem is, we have so many good examples of good businesses that just sell out as opposed to trying to become global because it seems so hard. And when those markets I mentioned were compared to productivity, it was because they had big companies that had become global and leveraged their scale. Think of the Denmarks of the world, Carlsberg, whatever you like. There's lots of them in Merv, South Norway. They are just phenomenally successful global businesses out of relatively small global markets. And we have very few.
Do you think that small, because we've got a big proportion of SMEs in New Zealand, and whenever we do research with SMEs about, like it might be trucking industry or whatever, a lot of them want to do is earn enough to buy the batch and the boat, and then they want to get it.
But that's not just a New Zealand thing. So I did a piece of work a few years ago, and I always thought that it's almost universal across all development markets. There is this, and all the government talking about growth. There are probably only 15 to 20% of small and medium businesses that actually have the space to, or attitudinally available to grow.
Yeah.
The rest are, it's too much pain. Yeah. I'm exiting.
There's only a handful of examples of growing, healthcare, Zero, Frontier to some degree, although that's not scalable. Yeah.
So that brings me
I'm conscious of time, and I don't want to use up too much of our panel's time because They're our guests.
What time are we supposed to finish?
We were finishing at 8 o'clock.
Oh,
We've got David a question.
I've got a completely different sort of question. I haven't think about it laterally. It seems to me that one of the really big economic issues since COVID has been that apparently by all sort of good measures, New Zealand is facing more and more inequality. And I would have thought that as an economic issue, that's a big one. And I wondered if you've got comments on where are we going in that regard? Should we be doing more about addressing inequality?
Yes.
But I think the polarisation of wealth is similar across most developed markets.
Well, according to
Not that that's actually an excuse.
There are a lot of indicators that social cohesion is becoming a big issue in New Zealand, and that it's driven a lot by the fact that the poor are getting poorer, and so it is a big issue. And it has a broader societal issue if you then start really seeing haves and have-nots.
Last question from the Dean.
So my question is about perception and reality check between the individual and the business. So if you think about annual salaries, in a fair world, nothing changes. You get inflation increase and the business pays it. But all of you in the panel said this time feels different. So in this context, is it fair for New Zealanders to expect an inflation increase right now?
You won't control inflation.
Pardon?
If you keep doing that, you won't actually control inflation.
Yeah, so can you explain that kind of context? Because it's sort of like everyone's paying more, so is the expectation on the individuals to suck it up to make it right? And is that...
so real wages have gone down because of inflation. So, and if you look at various different retailers, in our survey of business spending, we look at retailers, their expectations of being able to hand on cost increases are almost zero right now. So they realise that.
6 months ago, that was quite. Everyone was passing it.
Well, actually, what you saw, I think, was everyone was taking advantage of the fact that inflation's running at 6%. You can just use, everyone is.
You guys all voted for an increase tonight, so thank you very much.
So real wages are going down. So I wouldn't expect that. You may get an increase. It's probably not going to be at the rate of inflation.
And so so the reality is it's mum and dad, Joe Blogg's New Zealander, they're the ones that are going to feel it, but what you're saying is a year from now, whatever, the equilibrium's going to come right.
They'll be feeling it for a number of ways. One is that their wages aren't going up, their salaries aren't going up at the rate of inflation. Secondly, their mortgage interest rates have gone up considerably. So we saw a chart today, it's gone up something like on average 9% of the household budget to 18%. So that's double that. So that'll be hitting them. If they own a house, they'll be feeling their house prices continue down.
They bought one 2 years ago.
Yeah, and then probably also, you look at other stuff which is not really impacted by interest rates, but things like rates and insurance, all tracking up. So there's a whole range of things to go there, and that's what people are feeling.
But businesses have decisions to make, which is
and so my final question is, how does that compare to overseas? Like, are we at a risk of losing talent?
No.
I think also maybe just adding to that is that, businesses will need to make decisions, right? So maybe they can't provide inflationary increase, but then it's really important to look at non-price mechanisms of how can you retain talent.
But I think as a context of the country, we can't hold on like this for another 5 years.
But actually, if you look at the data, look at Australia, their GDP growth is slightly more than us. Actually, their inflation and their employment rate's about the same as ours. Okay. Their interest rates are lower, announced at the moment, but we'll be tracking down.
Some of
But their sentiment, if they were in this room, would be exactly the same as yours.
Yeah.
You know, we compare and say they're slightly better off, but the relative change that they're going through is the same as
So the
we are.
grass
It's just
isn't
slightly
greener.
less degree.
Okay.
So, to wrap it up, and I know we've wandered around truly over time since this week, questions in a room together. 3 months, 6 months, 18 months, 12 months? When are we going to start feeling summer, all blacks winning? Yeah, what's it going to be?
I think before every day people feel like my pick will be end of next year.
Ending that far out.
It's a phrase survive to 25.
Yeah.
Survive to 26.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think today's news around banks bringing interest rates down is a glimmer of hope. Certainly from our perspective, we've seen 10 out of the last 12 months, month-on-month declines in job ads. And the hope is we're at the bottom. Some of the things we saw today indicate that we might be close, if the economists believe. So, yeah, but I think a lot of people sit there and go, well, when we recover, it'll be like this. It won't be. Slowly goes.
I'd say, I think as that first OCR rate cut is pretty important in terms of a feeling that things are getting better. When more people got the money in their pocket, probably not, and then it's going to be into 25.
I mean, I would not necessarily attach time to it because it's all a key driver of it is OCR, but I do think it's time for New Zealand to adopt a mindset of economic growth and less focusing on targeted inflation.
I have one final question that I think everyone in the room has been wanting to ask Jason all night. Now that he's gone over to the economic side, Jason, who's better at predicting outcomes, pollsters or economists?
Well, I tell you what's really interesting is, so obviously when I was at Kent, the polling revenue for us was tiny. I won't say the percentage, but it's not tiny. The risk and the profile is huge. It's all whack to the money we actually made. And bad news on the polls was truly bad news. I can tell you these guys bad news on things like according to Silver Business is great news. we put out a bad one and it gets picked up every week. As Carin's saying,
Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you.